Hello and welcome to Scale War Machines. A big thank you to everyone who supported us on the website, Google+, Facebook and Twitter. As a thank you, here's a special reference film just for you.
The 75mm pack howitzer, one of the most effective artillery pieces used by the Marine Corps. The mass fire of the howitzer is especially effective against area targets, neutralizing them and pinning the enemy down so that Marine riflemen can advance. In addition to this, the pack howitzer is highly mobile, and a battery can be moved quickly wherever it is needed. But the hitting power of the howitzer and its mobility depend largely on the ability of the men who handle it, and that means you. The effectiveness of the howitzer will depend on the way you have learned your duties and the way you work with the other members of the section, whether your job is to load the piece, operate the sight, or pull the lanyard that fires the piece. Remember, the effectiveness of the pack howitzer depends on you. Because it is so important for each man to understand the part he plays in the service of the piece, we're going to show you how a pack howitzer firing battery operates. A pack howitzer firing battery is composed of the executive, together with the instrument corporal and the recorder. 4 complete howitzer sections riding in the 1-ton trucks, which are also prime movers for the pieces. The ammunition section in 2 1-ton trucks, each loaded with 108 rounds of 75mm ammunition and a quantity of 50 caliber ammunition. 4 quarter-ton trucks drawing ammunition carts, each containing 39 rounds with 18 more rounds in the truck. With these is the rest of the ammunition section and a 1-ton truck and trailer that carries the anti-aircraft, anti-tank section. This is the makeup of a firing battery. The battery prepares for action as soon as it reaches the position area. Occupation and organization of position, as well as actual firing, will be controlled by the battery executive. The scout corporal points out to the executive the battery position and direction of fire. This information was previously obtained from the battery commander. The executive sends the instrument corporal to set up the aiming circle. The executive points out positions for each piece to the chiefs of sections, who direct the prime movers as near the positions as possible and supervise the sections as they prepare for action. Enough ammunition is unloaded for immediate firing. If more is needed, it is supplied by the ammunition section from the ammunition truck. The men in each section are the ones responsible for carrying out the commands of the executive, for delivering effective fire. Watch them, watch their duties. These are the jobs you will have to handle. The first thing they do is manhandle the howitzer into position. All action is conducted under the immediate supervision of the chief of section.
Rear the piece, fall in.
The other members of the section are a gunner, an assistant gunner, and 7 cannoneers.
First section order, sir.
When all sections of the battery have reported, the executive gives the command,
Prepare for action. All right.
At this command, the cannoneers must put their pieces, which are still in the travel position, into the position for firing. The chief of section supervises this procedure. Preparing the piece for action calls for the maximum of teamwork from the section. Each man must not only know his job, but he must fit his actions smoothly with those of the others, so that the crew works with the precision of a smooth-running machine. Coordination is especially important in this work because the howitzer battery is often called on to support the infantry from several positions in a brief period and must be able to get into action first. When the men have learned to work with complete coordination like this, the job can be done in a very short time. The job is finished in remarkably short time because each man has learned his job and knew just when to do it. Because this duty, which was done so quickly, consists of many individual jobs done simultaneously, we're going to go back to the beginning and show you the step-by-step process of preparing a piece for action.
Prepare for action. All right.
Number 1 removes cincha to the right. Gunner releases traversing handwheel thong. Numbers 2 and 4 remove the rear trail and place it to the rear. Numbers 1 through 6 prepare to remove the tube and recoil assembly. The odd numbers 1, 3, and 5 work on the right side, while the even numbers 2, 4, and 6 are on the left. Now number 7 secures the hand spike and places it near the left wheel, then lifts the towing pole to aid the other men as they remove the tube and recoil assembly to the front. Number 1 releases the axle sleeve lock. As numbers 2 and 7 lift the front trail, numbers 1 and 4 handle the wheels into the forward position, and number 1 secures the axle sleeve lock. The men return to the lifting bars and lift the tube and recoil assembly into position on the rockers. Number 3 locks rocker hooks. Number 7 unlocks the towing pole using the hand spike. Numbers 2 and 4 remove the towing pole, then they pick up the rear trail. We see in detail the technique of fastening the rear trail in place. Number 7 locks rear trail in position and puts the hand spike in the hand spike socket at the end of the rear trail. Number 2 removes rammer staff from its traveling position, assembles it to the sponge, while number 5 assembles the aiming stakes. Now the gunner hands firing lanyard to number 1 as he puts sight in place. The gunner uncovers the cross level and angle of sight bubbles, sets deflection 0 on the sight, and sets the index of the tilting head at 0. Then he zeroes the angle of sight scale. Now he sets the elevation scale at 200. The breech is closed only when the howitzer is loaded or in march order. The gunner and number 1 unlock the elevating hand wheels. Then gunner elevates the piece until the angle of sight bubble is centered. This brings the tube to the desired elevation. Number 2, using a cloth or waste, cleans the breech recess and chamber. Number 3 obtains the tools for setting the fuses and places them beside the ammunition. You have seen the duties of the cannoneers in preparing the piece for action. Now, the ammunition must be prepared for use. The rounds for the 75mm pack howitzer are packed in containers that are clamped together in groups of 3, forming a clover leaf. A supply of ammunition must always be available at the howitzer position. The rounds are laid out where they can be obtained easily. The powder charge, if it is known, may be prepared. Then the rounds are covered to protect them from direct rays of the sun. Now a trail pit is dug for each piece in the battery. This pit helps to stabilize the piece during fire.
Okay, that's good. Roll a piece in.
The next thing that must be done is to measure the minimum elevation. In simple terms, this means that they must make certain that a shell fired from the howitzer will clear whatever obstacles may be in the line of fire, such as tall trees. This job is done by the chief of section, assisted by the gunner, number 1 and number 7. The chief of section looks through the bore to make sure the lower edge clears the object. Number 1 elevates or depresses the piece at his direction. The gunner reads the figures on his elevation scale, and the chief of section reports to the executive.
6.5. Minimum elevation on 1, sir. 6.5. Get that. 6.5.
Now the pieces of the battery must be laid for direction. In other words, each piece must be laid so that its tube is parallel to the tube of every other piece, and all 4 are pointed in a known direction. The aiming circle, having been set up upon a direction previously determined by the battery commander, is now referred to the panoramic sight of each howitzer.
Battery adjust. Aiming point this instrument. Aiming point identified. Number 1, sir.
The other sections of the battery likewise report.
Deflection number 1. 2, 8, 5, 3. 2, 8, 5, 3.
Setting this deflection on his sight, the gunner then lays his gun by sighting on the aiming circle. Meanwhile, the executive is giving deflections to the other pieces.
Number 1, ready for check, sir.
The executive, having given readings for the other pieces, turns back to number 1 piece and gives a corrected reading.
Deflection number 1. 2, 8, 5, 1. 2, 8, 5, 1. 2 mils out, sir.
The gunner makes the necessary corrections, and then a third check is given.
Number 1, ready for recheck, sir. Deflection number 1. 2, 8, 5, 1. 2, 8, 5, 1. Check, sir. Number 1 is laid.
Now the piece is laid properly for direction. This same system is used to lay all the other pieces in the battery. Then the executive gives the command to set out the aiming stakes.
Aiming point, aiming stakes, record, deflection.
Aiming stakes are set out so that each piece in the battery will have a convenient aiming point upon which he can lay quickly and from which he can make his deflection changes. Number 5 takes the aiming stakes and runs with them in the direction indicated by the gunner. Number 5 drops one stake 50 yards from the piece, then takes the other to a point 100 yards from the piece. Looking through his sight, the gunner lines up the stake with the crosshairs of his sight. Then the stake is forced into the ground at this spot. The near stake is now lined up with the far stake to form a straight line with the crosshairs of the sight. Now the gunner has his aiming point, and he reports his referred deflection to the executive.
Refer deflection number 1, sir. 2, 800.
When he has reported this referred deflection, the gunner writes it down where he can see it easily. Now all preparations have been made and the section is ready to fire. The chief of section sends the men to their posts.
Cannoneers, post!
Each man is in the position where he can best work. The executive waits for the fire command to come from the battery commander.
Battery adjust. Shell HE, charge 3, fuse delayed.
Battery adjust. Shell HE, charge 3, fuse delayed. Revert deflection, right, 100. On number 1, open 3. Battery right, quadrant 2, 4, 0.
Without confusion, without delay,
Set.
each man in the crew executes his task, and the piece is ready
Ready.
to fire.
Number 1, fire.
Each man has played his part in the execution of fire. It is this sure knowledge of his job by each man that makes the pack howitzer a fast-moving, hard-hitting weapon. Not only the knowledge of his job alone, but also a knowledge of the duties of the other men in the section and in the battery. When you have this, you have teamwork. Without it, the howitzer loses its punch. Here, then, are the duties of the pack howitzer crew during firing. Watch them, learn them. Someday they will be yours. Number 7 has 2 duties. He shifts the trail according to the gunner's direction. And he makes sure that the ejected cartridges are kept out of the way of the other cannoneers. Although he may be assisted by other cannoneers, removing ammunition from their containers is a duty belonging specifically to number 6. Numbers 5 and 6 work together in preparing the charge. Each round contains 4 numbered powder charges. If the command is charge 3, then number 5 removes charge 4, leaving the first 3 charges in the round. Then number 6 replaces the projectile and passes the round to number 4. Number 4 and number 3 work together setting the fuse. Number 4 acts as assistant in this operation. When the fuse is set, number 4 passes the round to number 2 so that it can be loaded quickly. The job of setting the fuses belongs to number 3. There are 2 types of fuses used with the 75mm pack howitzer, the M48 and the M54. The difference between them is easily seen. Setting the fuse of the M48 is a comparatively simple operation. The M48 is packed with the fuse set at super quick. At this setting, the M48 explodes instantaneously upon impact. Number 3's first duty is simple. To change the M48 from super quick to fuse delay, number 3 simply uses a screwdriver to turn the setting sleeve from SQ, super quick, to delay. When the fuse is adjusted to this setting, there's a delay of 0.05 or 0.15 of a second, depending on the type of fuse, between the moment of impact and the resultant explosion. This gives the round time to penetrate its target for the maximum of damage. Or if the round ricochets, it bursts just after glancing from the ground. The M54 fuse is quite different. A combination percussion and time fuse, it can be said to explode after the lapse of a definite time from firing. This shell is most useful in neutralization fire when the enemy cannot be reached by shells that burst only upon impact with the ground. The first thing number 3 must do in setting the M54 fuse is to secure the fuse wrench. If the command were time 11.2, number 3 would set the fuse to 11.2 with the fuse wrench. Notice the safety pin in the fuse. This pin must, of course, be removed before the shell is loaded. When on a time setting, the round will explode while still in air, hurling its fragments in a shower that can reach a dug-in enemy. However, if the projectile should strike before the time fuse completes its burning, the super-quick action of the fuse will cause the shell to explode. As soon as the quadrant elevation command is given by the executive,
Quadrant 260.
number 2 loads the piece. This is a job that requires exact handling. Note how number 2 holds the shell. It is up to number 2 to see that the shell is free from dirt, that the case is not dented, and that the projectile fits properly into the case.
Set. Ready. Number 1, fire.
When several volleys are ordered, the second round and all succeeding rounds are loaded as soon as the piece is fired.
First round.
To keep track of the number that have been fired, number 2 calls out the number of each round he loads.
Number 1, fire. Second round.
He indicates the end of the mission by calling,
Very last round. Fire.
when firing is heavy, the bore should be swabbed frequently to keep it cool. But it is up to number 2 to inspect the bore and chamber for any foreign matter that may have been left by a round, so that he may remove it before damage results. When the bore must be cleaned during firing, number 2 will operate the rammer staff, swabbing out the bore with a sponge and then cleaning it with a cloth. The position of number 1 is at the breech of the howitzer. The breech, always kept open unless the piece is loaded or in march order, is closed by number 1 as soon as number 2 has loaded the piece. Then, using the elevating hand wheel, number 1 elevates the piece until the bubble of the gunner's quadrant is centered.
Set.
Then, as soon as the chief of section gives him the word, number 1 fires.
Number 1, fire.
He immediately opens the breech. The duties of the assistant gunner are concerned with elevation. To accomplish this, he has the gunner's quadrant, on which he sets the quadrant elevation announced by the executive.
Quadrant 260.
When the assistant gunner has set the proper elevation on his quadrant, he places it on the leveling plates of the breech, and number 1 elevates the tube until the quadrant bubble is centered. The final movement of the bubble should be from front to rear. The assistant gunner says,
Set.
as soon as the piece is laid for elevation. The gunner and the sight. Almost every duty the gunner has is in connection with the sight of the pack howitzer. His is perhaps the most complicated job of any of the section, for upon his skill and precision in setting the sight correctly will depend a great deal of the accuracy in firing. The first duty of the gunner is to center the level bubbles on the sight mount. He must do this every time the tube is moved. Unless these bubbles, the angle of sight and cross-level bubbles, are centered, the sight will not measure accurately horizontal angles. The gunner sets the deflection on his sight when the executive gives his fire command.
Aiming point, church steeple. Deflection 2950.
By shifting the trail, the sight is brought onto the aiming point. Bringing the sight onto the aiming point has shifted the tube so that it now points in the proper direction. The gunner also changes his deflection upon the command of the executive.
Left 50.
When the gunner changes his deflection left 50, he adds 50 mils to the setting already on his sight. But when the deflection changes right 50, he subtracts 50 mils. This word Lars, L-A-R-S, will help you remember that. Left add, right subtract. Remember that word Lars when you must make a change in the deflection setting. When the gunner has laid on the aiming point and made a final check on his deflection, and after the assistant gunner is called out,
Set.
the gunner calls,
Ready. One, fire.
At the completion of registration on the base point, the officer conducting the fire may command,
Record base deflection. Base deflection number 1, sir. 2965.
the gunner reports the deflection he has on his sight. The referred deflection is now discarded as no longer useful. In its place, the gunner records the base deflection. This is the deflection from which he will make deflection changes, and this is the deflection he records so that he will not forget it.
Two lead. Range 600. Fired will.
When firing on moving targets which are visible from the gun position, the gunner, assisted by number 7, maintains the lead announced by the chief of section. The chief of section, the man who is responsible for the actions of the individual cannoneers, has many specific duties in addition to acting as supervisor. The chief of section measures the minimum elevation, determining the elevation at which the tube just clears any obstruction in the field of fire.
Okay.
Under certain conditions, the chief of section assists the gunner in identifying an aiming point.
Aiming point, church steeple, right front. Aiming point identified, number 1, sir.
When firing directly at a target, the chief of section will help the gunner locate his target quickly.
Battery adjust. Shell HE charge 3, fuse quick. Base deflection right, 7-2.
The chief of section listens to the commands of the executive, making sure that they are carried out properly by his section.
6, 7. Number 1, 2 rounds, quadrant 203.
When the piece is ready to fire, the chief of section indicates this to the executive by holding up his arm. When each chief of section has indicated that his piece is ready to fire, the executive gives the order to fire. At this order, the chief of section drops his arm.
Fire!
Or it may be that his men are not able to see or hear the executive. However, when firing on a moving target, the order to fire is given by the gunner.
Fire! Layup 1-0. Number 1, 1 round. 1, 2, 6.
A mistake. Instead of adding 1-0 to his deflection, the gunner erroneously subtracted, changing his deflection right 1-0.
Ready. 1, fire.
The gunner discovers his error and immediately reports it to the chief of section.
Sergeant.
This is important. Any mistake, no matter what it is, should be reported immediately.
I fired 20 mils right. All right, put it on. Number 1 fired 20 mils right, sir. Been corrected. Base deflection number 1, sir. 2965.
Another duty of the chief of section is to record the basic data that must be remembered, the base deflection, the powder charges, and so forth. This is recorded by the recorder who works with the executive, but the chief of section also records it for a double check. At no time must the chief of section allow a delay through faulty functioning of the materiel. One thing to be checked frequently is the length of recoil. Here, the length of recoil can be measured by reading the length of this mark in inches. The amount of recoil must never exceed 32 inches. At the executive's command,
Target that tank. Fire at will. Final piercing ammunition. Range 600. One tank lead. Fire well.
the chief of section controls the fire of his piece against a tank, an armored car, or any moving target. You have seen the duties of the cannoneers. These are the things you will have to know, the things you will have to do. There are other things you will learn in the field when you have had practice and experience. But whatever your duty is, learn it well. When a firing mission is completed, the pack howitzer battery must be ready to go to a new position. The battery must be able to utilize to the fullest extent its advantage of mobility, so that continuous support can be given the infantry.
Close station, march order.
Upon receiving this command, each section will put the howitzer into its travel position. Again, the chief of section supervises the entire procedure. The gunner traverses the piece to the travel position. Then he zeroes the elevation scale, sets the deflection scale to 0, and also zeroes the angle of sight scale. Now the gunner removes the sight from the sight mount, and number 1 removes the firing lanyard and hands it to the gunner. Gunner places the sight into the sight box, being very careful to see that it fits properly. Number 6 replaces the muzzle cover. Number 5 puts a lifting bar into the forward position on the tube. Then he and number 6 bear down on this bar as number 7 unlocks rear trail. Numbers 2 and 4 remove the rear trail and replace it with the towing pole, which is locked into position by number 7. Number 3 now unlatches the rocker hooks. The other lifting bars are put in place, and as number 7 lifts up on the towing pole, the other men remove the tube and recoil assembly to the front. Now numbers 1 and 4 change the wheels and axle to the travel position. Number 1 locks the axle sleeve lock. Now the 6 men lift the tube and recoil assembly, and as number 7 again lifts the towing pole, they place it in its travel position on the front trail. Numbers 1, 3, and 5 remove their lifting bars and return them to the lifting bar bag along with the handspike. Number 5 sets out after the aiming stakes. Gunner and number 7 place the sight box and accessory chest on the carriage. Gunner secures traversing handwheel to keep the piece from traversing during travel. Number 2 disassembles rammer's staff, placing it in lifting bar bag. Then he assists number 4 in placing the rear trail on the carriage. Number 5 puts the aiming stakes in the lifting bar bag. Then he and number 3 place the bag on the rear trail. Gunner and number 1 now place the cincher in position and secure it. The other men prepare the unexpended ammunition for loading, working with the same quick sureness. The chief of section makes a final check to see that all is secure. Now the howitzer is made fast to the prime mover. The unexpended ammunition has been placed in the trucks. And upon the signal of the executive, the battery starts to move. The battery is on the way to its next position. In order to acquaint the battery with fire under all field conditions, firing missions are conducted in various locations. At each one, the battery receives training in getting into action quickly. By now, every man knows exactly what to do. No time is wasted. The piece is put into its firing position. Ammunition is prepared.
Deflection number 3.
The piece is laid for direction.
4, 6, 6.
But this is no ordinary mission of firing at targets that cannot be seen.
Tank approaching, left front. Target that tank. Fired well.
At this command, the chief of section conducts the fire of his piece, directing fire as long as the tank is in his sector of responsibility. The gunner sets deflection 0 so that the sight and the tube are pointing in the same direction. Number 7 shifts the trail, moving it constantly, sighting along the tube to help the gunner keep the target constantly in the sight. The chief of section must gauge the direction and speed of the target so that he can tell the gunner the proper amount of lead to maintain.
2 leads, range 600. Fire it well.
The gunner will have to operate the traversing and the elevating hand wheels by himself to keep his sight on the target. Note how the gunner keeps the estimated lead on his sight. Number 2 loads the piece as soon as he can and stands ready to load again. The command to fire is given by the gunner as soon as he is ready.
Fire!
Gunner goes right back to sight and continues operating.
Fire!
This time, the tank is hit and disabled sufficiently to become an easy target. This is a difficult thing to do, but the teamwork of the cannoneers made it possible. They knew their jobs, they were ready for whatever came. Remember that each man knew his job. And each of you must know what to do and when to do it. This is teamwork, and it is teamwork that makes the 75mm pack howitzer an effective weapon.
Ready?
The howitzer is designed to neutralize enemy areas so that Marines can advance protected by a curtain of fire from their own guns. But it is only when each man in the firing battery, when each of you does his part, that the pack howitzer becomes a fast, tough weapon. For a weapon is only as good as the men who use it, but a fighting man is as good as he wants to be. Remember, it's up to you.
Subscribe for our latest videos.